We've had a quote from the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Israel, Gideon Sa'ar, and he says, "We've been informed about the UK's decision to include two of our ministers on the British sanctions lists." He says it's outrageous that elected representatives, members of the government, has objected to these kinds of measures, and that he discussed it earlier with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and they're going to hold a special government meeting early next week to decide on our response to this unacceptable decision. Well, let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. Dominic, what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, as you say, we have this response from Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar saying that what Britain's done is outrageous. And he's kind of jumping the gun there in the sense that it's not kind of officially announced yet, although the Times has been reporting that Britain and Canada and Australia and New Zealand are all united in these sanctions, which kind of distance them very much from what Washington's been doing with Israel. So they are freezing the assets and imposing the travel bans on Itamar Ben-Gvir, is Israel's security minister, a notorious far-right extremist regarded as a terrorist by some, a Jewish terrorist by some, certainly an anti-Arab racist who is Israel's security minister, and also Bezalel Smotrich, who is equally on the far right of Israeli politics, who is the finance minister in the Netanyahu coalition government. Controversial for a number of reasons. Their history has been littered with controversial comments and allegedly racist anti-Arab rhetoric. But most recently, they've been very controversial for what they've said about Gaza. Smotrich in particular, who's talked about Gaza not being allowed a grain of wheat, saying Gaza will be entirely destroyed and Palestinians will have to leave in great numbers and to go to third countries. So accused there of starving or certainly expressing support for the idea of Palestinians being starved out of Gaza, if you take his words in that light. And Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister, someone who's advocated, for instance, the removal of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, replacing it with a Jewish third temple, making him very much a Jewish extremist. So they're being singled out for sanctioning by the British government, joined with Canada, Australia, New Zealand and others. And that is a significant break, I think it's fair to say, to sanction two members of the Israeli government. And obviously we've had a furious response from the Israelis saying this is an unacceptable decision. But I think it sort of highlights the growing diplomatic ostracization of Israel as concern about its alleged genocide in Gaza, its alleged war crimes in Gaza, continues to isolate the country. So I think we'll expect more furious responses from Israel. And this comes ahead of other expected diplomatic developments. Next week, France is hosting a meeting along with Saudi Arabia where France may become the latest country to recognise Palestine. That will be also, I think, an expression of their frustration with Israel. We've had the Irish government, we've had the Amnesty International, and we've had various former UN officials all saying that Israel is now guilty of genocide, something the Israeli government furiously rejects. But it is, I think, this move today that's just been announced is certainly part of that, as I say, diplomatic ostracization of Israel that Israelis will be very angry about, saying what they're doing in Gaza is a necessary means to try and get their hostages back. But the way they're doing it is causing deep concern and obviously now concrete diplomatic action from some of Israel's closest allies.
And this additional pressure that the UK government is putting on Israel, I mean, yes, you know, we've had one minister expressing his displeasure about it, but in reality, will this change anything?
Well, I'd say it's a sort of incremental process. I mean, what this does now is it makes it impossible for Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich to travel to Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and whatever other countries are involved in this. And it freezes their assets, whether they wanted to come here or not. And certainly, you know, their Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu's his travel movements are restricted because of the actions against him in the international criminal courts. And we have some separate legal procedure going on in the International Court of Justice, the highest world court that has accused Israel provisionally of possibly being guilty of war crimes and genocide in Gaza and saying that effectively putting Israel on kind of probation while those claims are looked at. I think some of these things are symbolic. Some of them do obviously have a sort of effect on ministers' ability to invest and to travel. But what will make I think a bigger difference is if Britain, for instance, decides that Israel is guilty of genocide, something I pressed the Foreign Secretary on a couple of weeks ago. He made it pretty clear that he's going to leave it for the courts to decide, but he and his Prime Minister, I think, are under growing pressure to decide whether they themselves, as both lawyers, believe or not whether Israel is now guilty of genocide. Certainly, if they're concerned about two of its ministers, the government ministers, being guilty of what they're accusing them of, then you might think that Israel's Prime Minister might be tarred with the same brush.